for the sake of it. What does Imam say? He says it's more useful than a sharp iron spearhead. In a battlefield, if you have a stone, it can only go so far. If you have an arrow, firstly you need to be a very good aimer. Secondly, the wind can take it. But if you have a spear, that too one whose head is from iron and which is sharp, then there's no stopping. It'll cut everything. In the same way, supplication, when you're on a low, it's a shield. And when you're on a high, it's your method of progressing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from his part, we've understood that he's ready to listen to us. So now the important question. How? What do you and me need to do in order to understand this secret or this art of communicating with Allah? Is it something we can open up a textbook and learn? Is it something you can come to a lecture and all of a sudden learn by the time you exit the doors? You know now how to speak to Allah and how to communicate with Allah? Is it something deeper than that? In order to understand it, let me remind you that we have many types of communication. Whenever we say communicate with Allah, we straight away think that we have to lift our hands and speak to Him. There's many types of communication with Allah. And in the same way in this world, you communicate by email, by your phone, by body language, by eyes. You communicate in many different methods. In the same way with Allah, we have different types of communication, different methods of communication. Supplicate, you speak to Him. Number one. Number two, dhikr. When you remember Him, you glorify Him by His name. Number three, by your eyes. You can even communicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your eyes. If we have time, we'll talk about it at the end. Even smiling. You can communicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just by smiling. Look at the Quran. Quran says about Nabiullah Sulaiman, حَتَّى إِذَا أَتَوْا عَلَى وَادِ النَّمْلِ, that when Sulaiman came to the valley of the ants, one of the ants made a call and he said, "Oh ants, enter your houses, that Sulaiman and his army may not crush you while they do not know, whilst they're heedless of crushing you." Sulaiman heard this, right? Sulaiman had the power of understanding the animals and their language. So he understood what the ant said. So what does he do? What is the instantaneous reaction of Sulaiman when Allah guides him? فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا. So he smiled, laughing. And then he talks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know someone who does this very often, and it probably happens to you as well. You try to do something, you make sure you take all precautions, and it just doesn't work. You leave early from home, you get to the train station, train is delayed, you get the bus is delayed, so then you just laugh and you tell Allah, "What are you playing at?" You laugh at Him. You say, "Allah, sort it out, man, what are you playing at? Why are you doing this to me?" Even this smiling and laughing is a method of communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It happens to you and me. When somebody gives you a gift which you're not expecting, and you love it so much, what do? You're speechless. You begin to laugh. You begin to smile. You begin to cry. No words now. We've transcended this world of words, this communication with words. And we now move into physical action of smiling, laughing, like Sulaiman did. So this is another method of communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is just a brief, but let us concentrate on supplication, on actually speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I divide it into two, informal and formal. You have the informal method of speaking to Allah. You know, for those of you who are married or engaged, when you first met your spouse, you were very, very formal with each other. When you sat down in that interview, you were both shaking, both nervous, you didn't know how to speak to each other. Very formal. Because there's certain barriers, certain hudud that you can't transcend. But then once you're engaged and once you're married, now there's no barriers between you. You can speak how you want. No need for introductions. Just go straight to that point. Same with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we have states where we're very informal with Allah. This is a state of friendship, a state of ecstasy, a state of love. We feel very close to Him. So we talk to Him however we want. I'll give you a story. I don't know if I mentioned it in our last meeting. My Farsi teacher when I was in Iran, he was saying that he went to Iraq, I think it was to Kadmay. He went for ziyarah. He had a 5-6-year-old son, and the son got lost when they were in the haram. He's very upset now. They've been looking for him for hours and they can't find his son. So he looks at the dome of the Imam and he tells the Imam, he tries to blackmail the Imam, emotional blackmail. Paraphrasing, he tells the Imam, this is what you do to the people who come to visit you. I came all the way to visit you and this is how you treat me, that my son gets lost. Just as he finished talking to the Imam, somebody screamed and they said they found his son, he was holding on to the darih. So he became very happy and emotional, started crying. And then he looks again at the dome and he tells the Imam, I also want a house. And there's a secret in here, which we'll come to if Allah gives us the ability and the permission. There's a secret why his dua was accepted. And this is the art of communication. This is the secret of communication with Allah. We'll come to it. Anyway, he asked the Imam, I also want a house. He told me that every year they used to move houses at least 12 times. Because in Iran it's very hard to buy a house, firstly. And then if you're renting, it's much easier. So they were renting houses, but they kept having to move because things were being changed, the rent price, etc. So he goes back to Iran, goes to the bunga, the estate agent, right? Goes to the estate agent, speaks to the estate agent and then tells him that I'm looking for a house. Just as he's speaking to the estate agent, one of his friends comes in. And he tells, it's a true story, but I'm not making this up. His friend tells him, come with me, I've got a good house for you. He says, but he didn't want to tell him that I don't have the money to pay for it, because he's not wealthy. Anyway, just so that he keeps his reputation, he doesn't look bad, he went with his friend, they went to this beautiful house, and the man tells him that this house is for X amount, for example, $15,000. So Sheikh was saying, his name is Sheikh Zahrai, he was saying that I wanted to leave the house with respect. At the same time, I didn't want this guy to think that I have the money to buy the house. So what I thought I'd do, I'd give him a very small price, a very little price. And then he'll tell me that I can't sell it for you for this price, so never mind. So I told him I can afford $2,000. And I was expecting the reaction to come back and say that, this house isn't being sold for that much. Maybe you can find a house somewhere else. He said he turned around and told me sold. A house for $2,000 sold. He said I couldn't believe it. He said we wrote the what do you call it? Help me out. We wrote the contract. You guys are too quiet. We wrote the contract, signed it, everything, and I went home and I told my wife I bought a house, and she wouldn't look at me. She said, stop playing around. She said, I've had enough of moving houses, stop messing around with me. I know we can't afford a house. He said it took her half an hour before she actually looked at this contract, and we had actually bought a house. This is a method to talk to Allah in an informal manner. No barriers. Speak to Him however you want. But there's condition to it. One condition and one secret, which we'll come to if Allah permits us. This type of state, this state of friendship, it tends to be governed by farh, by happiness, by ecstasy, by vastness, wasa' of the heart. That's when you can begin to talk in this manner. Then you have the formal dua, the formal supplication, which many of us know of. It's when the relationship between the master and the servant comes about. You have respect barriers now. You have a method of speaking to Allah. You have what we call the sandwich dua. You start with hamd, praise and salawat. You do your dua, and at the end you finish with praise and salawat again. What we know is this sandwich dua. Again, the same condition applies. The same secret applies. And the governing factor of this type of supplication to Allah tends to be huzn, or sadness, and constraint. When someone's constrained within themselves, their heart is constrained, then they begin to talk to Allah in this type of master-servant relationship, especially when you're asking for forgiveness. Let me give you practical examples of both of these in our daily lives that happen. It's always happened to you, it's happened to me. Sometimes you desire something inside yourself, you don't say it, and it happens. You want something, and the next thing you know, you got it. Even if it's something small. You wanted a certain food, and your mom's made it when you go home. Simple stuff, and then you tell yourself, if only I'd wished for something else. That's a type of dua as well. It's come sincerely, you don't need to say it. It's just within you, and it happens. I'll give you a personal example. Right now I went to Nairobi for tabligh, and I reached Dubai. I was going back onto the flight to Nairobi, and I passed business class on the way out of the aircraft. When I was passing out business class, I looked and these seats were huge, right? And I thought, man, imagine if one day we could travel in business class. I don't think it's correct, even if someone has the money to spend it in such a manner. But anyway, that thought came to my mind. Now I'm getting onto the plane to get to Nairobi. I go to the boarding desk. I gave him my ticket. I had already chosen my seat and everything online. And then the lady gives me a ticket, the boarding pass. And it says 6F on it. And I started telling her, but this is not the seat I chose. Why did you change my seat? So she points her finger at the top of the boarding pass and it says business. I said, business? I'm in economy, man. Why have you given me a business class thing? So then a man from the back comes and tells me, are you complaining? Would you like me to change you back to economy? That's when I told him, I think I'll